So when she decided to plant a small vegetable garden along the southern wall of her backyard, 12 tomato plants, 2 rows of green beans, a handful of pepper seedlings, and a modest herb border, she did not think twice about it. She was not being reckless. She was not making a statement. She was a woman who enjoyed fresh tomatoes and didn't see any reason to pay $3 a piece for them at the grocery store when the soil in her yard was perfectly good. The garden was tucked behind her fence. It was not visible from the street. It disturbed no one. It made no noise. It harmed absolutely nothing. And yet, 43 days after the first seedlings broke through the soil, a cream-colored envelope appeared wedged between her front door and the frame. The Birchwood Lane Homeowners Association, formally incorporated, aggressively managed, and led by a woman named Renee Ashworth who had appointed herself president for the 3rd consecutive term, had issued Dana a formal violation notice. The charge was simple and infuriating: unauthorized agricultural use of residential property. The fine was $47. The demand was immediate removal of all garden beds within 14 days, or additional fines would accumulate at $25 per week. Dana read the letter twice. Then she set it on her kitchen table, made herself a cup of tea, and read it a 3rd time. She was not angry yet. Not quite. What she felt in that first hour was something closer to disbelief. The particular disbelief that comes when something so unreasonable happens that your brain simply struggles to process it as real. She had seen the HOA enforce rules before. She had watched them send notices about trash cans left at the curb too long, about holiday decorations that stayed up past a certain date, about lawn heights measured to the half-inch during particularly aggressive summers. She had always found it excessive, but she had never been the target. Until now. By the time she had finished her tea, the disbelief had sharpened into something harder. She did not remove the garden. Instead, she showed up to the next HOA board meeting, a monthly gathering held in the community center that normally attracted between 4 and 8 board homeowners, and she asked Renee Ashworth to explain, in plain language, exactly which provision of the HOA's governing documents prohibited a homeowner from growing vegetables on their own private property, behind their own fence, completely out of public view. Renee had an answer ready. She cited Section 4.7 of the Birchwood Lane Community Standards, which restricted homeowners from operating any commercial enterprise or conducting agricultural activity on residential lots. She said it with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed it. She said it with a smile. Dana asked one follow-up question. She asked whether Renee understood the legal distinction between agricultural activity conducted for commercial purposes and a private citizen growing food for personal consumption on land they owned outright. The room went quiet. Renee's smile flickered. The board voted to uphold the fine, 4-1. The one dissenting vote came from a retired postal worker named Gerald who had been on the board for 9 years and had learned, somewhere along the way, to recognize when a situation was about to go sideways. Dana thanked the board for their time, drove home, and sat in her driveway for 10 minutes thinking about her next move. She called her nephew the following morning. He was not a lawyer, but he was something in some ways more useful at this particular moment. He was a paralegal who specialized in property and land use law, and he had been telling Dana for years that HOA governing documents were only as powerful as the homeowners allowed them to be. What he told her over the phone in the next 20 minutes was the piece of information that changed everything. In her state, a property of any size, including a standard residential lot, could apply for an agricultural use designation if the owner demonstrated the land was being used to produce food, fiber, or other crops for any purpose, including personal use. The designation was not a loophole. It was a recognized legal classification established in state statute, fully enforceable, and, most critically, once granted, it placed the property under a set of land use regulations that superseded HOA authority in areas directly related to agricultural activity. In other words, if Dana's yard became a legally designated agricultural property, the HOA's Section 4.7 would not just be challenged. It would be irrelevant. Dana asked her nephew how long the application process took. He told her somewhere between 3 and 6 weeks, depending on the county assessor's office. She asked what she needed to submit. He told her he would send her the forms that evening. She thanked him, hung up, walked out to her backyard, looked at her tomato plants swaying slightly in the afternoon breeze, and made a decision. She was not going to plant less. She was going to plant more. A lot more. And by the time the HOA figured out what she was doing, it was going to be far, far too late to stop her. The application Dana submitted to the county assessor's office was thorough, precise, and completely unremarkable from a legal standpoint. It listed her property at 14 Birchwood Lane as a residential lot of approximately 0.31 acres, described the existing food-producing plants already in the ground, outlined her intention to expand production, and formally requested classification as a residential microfarm under the state's agricultural land use statute. She attached photographs of her garden. She included a hand-drawn map of her property with planned planting zones marked in colored pencil. She even included a short written statement describing her intent to produce vegetables, herbs, and fruit for personal use and community sharing. She submitted it on a Tuesday. She did not mention it to anyone in the neighborhood. She did not post about it. She did not tip off a single soul. She simply waited. While she waited, she got busy. Using money she had set aside from her pension and a small inheritance she'd been sitting on for 2 years without a purpose worthy of it, Dana quietly transformed her backyard. She brought in 3 cubic yards of premium compost. She built raised garden beds along every fence line. She planted squash, zucchini, cucumber, 2 varieties of kale, sweet corn in a tight back row, strawberry runners along the borders, and expanded her original tomato section to cover nearly a quarter of the yard. She installed a drip irrigation system with a timer. She built a small wooden storage shed within the HOA-approved dimensions, naturally, and filled it with tools, seed trays, and bags of organic fertilizer. She did all of this legally, calmly, and methodically. For weeks and 2 days after submission, an envelope arrived from the county assessor's office. Dana opened it at her kitchen table with the same deliberate calm she had brought to every step of this process. Inside was a single official document confirming that 14 Birchwood Lane had been granted residential agricultural use designation under state statute, effective immediately. She set the document down. She allowed herself exactly 1 moment of quiet satisfaction. Then she made 2 phone calls. The first was to her nephew to say thank you. The second was to a local equipment rental company to ask about short-term tractor rental rates. The tractor arrived on a Saturday morning. It was not a massive industrial machine. It was a compact utility tractor, perfectly sized for a residential property, cheerful green in color, and completely, entirely, perfectly legal to park in a residential driveway when the property in question held an active agricultural use designation. Dana had confirmed this in writing with 2 separate county offices before making the reservation. The tractor sat in her driveway for the entire weekend. It is difficult to describe what happened in the neighborhood over those 48 hours without sounding like a work of fiction. Neighbors slowed their cars. Children pointed. 3 people took photographs. And Renee Ashworth, whose own home sat directly across the street, reportedly stood on her front porch for nearly 4 minutes on Saturday afternoon staring at the machine with an expression that her neighbor Gerald would later describe as looking like someone who had just lost an argument with a calendar. By Monday, Dana had received a second violation notice. This one cited improper vehicle storage and conduct inconsistent with residential zoning. The fine was $150. Dana did not panic. She did not call the board. She simply mailed Renee a copy of her agricultural use designation certificate, a printed excerpt from the relevant state statute, and a brief typed note, professional in tone, precise in language, explaining that as a legally designated agricultural property, her land was subject to state land use law in matters pertaining to agricultural activity. That parking equipment related to active agricultural operations was explicitly protected under that same statute, and that she would be forwarding any further violations related to her farm operations directly to her attorney for review. The second fine was quietly rescinded within 10 days. But Dana was not finished. She had done her research thoroughly, and what she had discovered went well beyond her own situation. Using public records requests she had filed during those weeks of waiting, she had obtained the HOA's financial disclosures, meeting minutes, and a copy of every violation notice issued on Birchwood Lane over the past 4 years. What she found was a pattern: dozens of fines issued without proper written notice, fees assessed without homeowner votes, and at least 2 cases where fines had been levied against residents who had already corrected their alleged violations before the deadline. She compiled everything into a document. She shared it with 6 neighbors she trusted. Those 6 neighbors shared it with others. Within 3 weeks, 11 homeowners had formally requested an emergency board review. A property rights organization in the state capital, the kind that existed precisely for moments like this one, sent a letter to the HOA board informing them that they were under review for potential violations of state HOA governance law. Renee Ashworth resigned from the board on a Thursday afternoon in late October. She submitted her resignation by email, with no explanation and no farewell. The remaining board members voted to conduct a full financial audit, suspend all outstanding fines pending review, and hire an outside administrator to oversee operations while the association restructured. Gerald, the 9-year board veteran who had cast the single dissenting vote the night Dana first appeared at that meeting, was elected interim president by unanimous vote. His first act was to formally repeal Section 4.7. Dana heard the news while she was in her backyard, harvesting the last of the season's tomatoes. 12 plants had become 41. Her pepper yield had been extraordinary. The zucchini had gotten almost comically out of hand, as zucchini tends to do when given proper care and enough room to grow. She filled her basket, walked back toward the house, and paused at the edge of the garden to look at everything she had built. The tractor had been returned to the rental company 2 months ago. It had served its purpose. Some battles are won with lawyers and land use statutes. Some are won with paperwork and patience. And some, just some, are won by parking a compact utility tractor in your driveway on a Saturday morning and letting it do the talking for you. Dana Calloway had grown a lot more than vegetables that year. She had grown the one thing the HOA never saw coming: the will to win.